Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary.
At the commencement of our sitting, let us be still. Please take your seats. Before we commence today's business, I wish to inform members that a number of bills have received royal assent. The Budget Number 2 bill received royal assent on the 4th of August 2021. It will be known as the Budget Number 2 NI Act 2021 and as Chapter 5. The Pension Schemes Bill received royal assent on the 9th of August 2021. It will be known as the Pension Schemes Act NI 2021 and as Chapter 6. The Licensing and Registration of Clubs Bill received royal assent on 26th of August. It will be known as the Licensing and Registration of Clubs Amendment Act NI 2021 and as Chapter 7. Local Government Meetings and Performance Bill received royal assent on the 26th of August 2021. It will be known as the Local Government Meetings and Performance Act NI 2021 and as Chapter 8. I also wish to advise members that I have received notification of the resignation of Linda Dillon as Deputy Chairperson of the Committee for Justice with effect from the 31st of July. Nominating officer for Sinn Féin has informed me that Sinead Ennis has been nominated as Deputy Chairperson of the Committee for Justice with effect from the 2nd of August. I am satisfied that the requirements of standing orders have been met. Members have been given notice by not less than 30 members. I have been given notice by not less than 30 members. I have summoned the Assembly to meet today for the purpose of debating a motion on guidance to schools on COVID-19. I will ask the Clerk to read the motion.
That this Assembly expresses its significant concern with increasing reports of pupil absences due to COVID-19 situation in our schools, recognises that this situation has been worsened by the failure of the Minister of Education to develop clear and robust guidance for our school staff, notes the scale of the burden which this has placed on many of our principals and teachers, and calls on the Minister of Education to work urgently with the Public Health Agency to issue guidance which is cognisant of the unique circumstances of the school setting in the context of COVID-19.
Thank you, Clerk. And I call Nicola Brogan to move the motion.
Moved.
Thank you. And the Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1.5 hours for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 5 minutes. Please open the debate on the motion.
I'd first of all like to thank my colleague and Deputy Chair of the Education Committee, Pat Sheehan, for initiating this emergency sitting of the Assembly, and thank all members who supported his petition to do so. I imagine all members across the Assembly have been inundated with correspondence from principals, school leaders, teachers and parents of pupils who have raised grave concerns about the complete chaos the schools have been left to face since restarting this term. It's really important that we take the time to raise these concerns on behalf of the schools, but also for the children and young people and their parents who are yet again facing huge disruptions to their education and daily life because of the poor planning and preparation of our Education Minister. I'm sure we'll all agree that the best place for our children and young people is to be at school with their peers, but they must be safe and their families must be confident in their safety. It's hard to believe that within a couple of weeks of our schools reopening, the situation is in such disarray that the Assembly has had to be recalled. Last week, the Education Committee heard evidence directly from teaching representatives. They told us in no uncertain terms that the enormous burden being placed on principals and school leaders was unsustainable and unfair. They had serious concerns about the adequacy of the guidance issued by the Minister, and they had numerous examples of where support to implement that guidance was lacking. Within days of that engagement, increasing reports of pupil absences due to the COVID-19 situation in our schools confirmed concerns raised by those trade union reps. Out of 700 pupils attending Larne High School, more than 400 were told to stay at home. Within days of trying to implement the Minister's restart, teachers were reporting difficulties of keeping children safe and in school, and the scale of the disarray became increasingly more apparent. Principals reported their struggles to report cases to the PHA, desperately trying to use dedicated phone lines that were often unavailable for hours. In all other jurisdictions, track and tracing was being handled directly by the Public Health. But principals had repeatedly warned that leaving the administration of tracking and tracing COVID cases up to schools was overwhelming and undermined the ability of principals to do their own job. The Minister failed to recognise this until yesterday. Worse still, the guidance attempted to shift even more responsibility onto principals. Guidance suggested that schools could choose to bypass the PHA and inform those pupils identified as a close contact with a positive case directly. Yesterday, on the eve of this debate, the Minister was finally shamed to shift track and trace responsibility away from school principals and, in line with other jurisdictions, return it to the PHA. Although this move is certainly welcomed, we must make sure that these duties are carried out correctly by the PHA and that the burden is removed from principals and school leaders. Go ahead.
Thank you, Member, for giving way. Would the member recognise that the agreed position of the Executive was to carry out the testing within schools, which was agreed by all parties, including her own, who are well represented at the Executive table? If Sinn Féin, and indeed the member, felt that it was such an important issue, why did they not raise it at that stage?
I thank the member for his intervention, but I believe it's the job of the Education Minister to make sure those practices are in place. In regards to that, I encourage ongoing engagement and communication between the Education Minister and the PHA and school leaders to be sure the shift is implemented correctly. Tracking and tracing of COVID cases within school is not the only problem. COVID testing for school children has become a huge issue as well. Anticipation of a rise in the number of cases with the return to school was widely known. Additional planning to ensure that children identified as close contact could access testing as quickly and efficiently as possible would have been fundamental to achieving the stated aim of keeping our children safe in school and minimising disruption. Following robust questioning by Pat Sheehan at the Education Committee yesterday, it seems that the Department of Education didn't contact the PHA to prepare for and facilitate increased testing. And within days of the new term, an emergency mobile testing unit had to be hastily deployed to deal with the hundreds of pupils requiring PCR testing in Larne. In many areas, parents were reporting difficulties accessing PCR tests for children, and some families were being directed to testing centres many miles away, making it impossible for those without transport to access a test. Again, with the correct planning and preparation, this could have been avoided. I have engaged with many principals, school leaders and parents in my own constituency in West Tyrone. They have all agreed that their guidance is not working. It isn't working for the school leaders, the teachers, the parents, but most importantly, it isn't working for the pupils. Their education is once again being affected. A distraught principal in my area contacted me to offer some insight into the challenges that they face. This is just one example, but it offers some insight. I was told that a mum tested positive over the weekend. As required by the guidance, her children were given a PCR test. Their results were negative, so they attended school on Monday and Tuesday, before one of the children then tested positive. 3 more children in the same group have now tested positive. We need a different, more robust process. The committee has been repeatedly told that the Minister and Department is working closely with the Department of Health and other relevant bodies. Yet during a long summer recess with more than 8 weeks of time to plan and prepare, measures have not been put in place to ensure that our children return to a safe and secure new term. The Minister is not dealing with something totally unknown. The virus has been around for some time now and lessons should have been learned. It's not hard to understand that if we're relaxing some restrictions and increasing interaction within schools, other measures need to be in place. For example, faced with an airborne virus, if other interventions are relaxed, ventilation will move up the priority list. Schools were empty for weeks, but the Minister didn't initiate risk assessments. No measures were introduced to monitor air quality, and no action was taken to improve poor air flows. Unlike other jurisdictions, there were no plans to fund and acquire CO2 alarms. While the Welsh Minister for Education invested millions in providing schools with this technology, our Minister issued advice: open windows and doors if possible. But what if it's not possible? What should our schools do in that eventuality? Did the Minister have any plans in place? If classrooms had been given the technology, staff would be able to take immediate action to address a build-up of poor quality air. 1 minute, please. If classrooms had been given the technology, staff would be able to take immediate action to address a build-up of poor quality air by simple measures such as taking an open air break while the classroom is aired. In classrooms where CO2 alarms repeatedly register poor air quality, additional measures such as introduction of ventilation systems or air filters could be considered. Go ahead.
Thank the member for giving way. Could I quote to the member the President of the National Association of Head Teachers in Northern Ireland, Graham Galt, who has said, with the PHA taking on contract tracing, it will free up our school leaders to attend to their core business, which is learning and teaching. That in itself will be very, very welcome. The problem was identified last week and the Minister's moved to address it, hasn't she?
I thank the member for his intervention, but we've now moved on to ventilation, which is another major issue. Sure, go ahead.
Thanks very much for my Education Committee colleague for giving way. Would the member recognise that the issue to which the other member refers was not identified last week, but indeed has been an ongoing issue for many weeks and indeed months? The burden being placed on our school leaders in relation to contact tracing has been well known for some time, and regrettably this is a delayed intervention, however welcome it may be.
I thank the member for his intervention, and I absolutely agree with that there. To go back to my own speech, there's also been a lack of urgency in relation to the most basic of measures and replacing windows, either those that are either by design or disrepair, that they don't open. So the Minister surely knows that ventilation will be most difficult in our oldest school buildings. Finally, we all know the importance of children attending school. We all want pupils in school and their classrooms to be up and running. But we also know the schools need proper support to remain open safely during a pandemic. So I urge every member here to support our schools and our teachers by supporting this motion. Garmiagat.
Thank you. And I call Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I regretfully have to oppose this motion and again recognise that we are in a difficult COVID-19 situation as far as our children and our pupils are concerned. And there is obviously concern across the teaching professions, with parents and indeed the wider community around the virus spread. We all recognise that. And we do recognise, and I suppose as DUP, we have been saying from the very beginning of this situation, very beginning of the pandemic, the education of our children and young people has been a major concern for all of us. And the protection of children, protection of teaching staff, the protection of support staff is of paramount importance. We need to be mindful also of the need to protect vulnerable adults who come into contact with pupils and possible contact transmission. And the priority of the Education Minister is to make school a safe place for all our children and all our school staff. And keeping children in the classroom, face-to-face teaching, face-to-face interaction with teaching, face-to-face interaction with their peers is key to our children's future academic success. And the benefits, I will give way.
I thank the member for kindly giving way, and I agree that we all want schools to be safe places. But surely, if the member was engaging with principals and teachers and parents in his own constituency, he would realise that the current guidance rolled out by the department is actually making schools unsafe and very difficult for teachers and principals to work on.
The member has an additional minute.
I'm not the only one that engages with. I'm not the only member that engages with schools in this chamber. And the benefits of pupils' education is immense. Their physical well-being is improved, and we all share the concerns around the mental health and mental well-being of our young people over the pandemic. Minister McElveen, a former teacher, an experienced professional, takes her responsibilities very seriously. Within the last week, the Minister has met face-to-face with 10 school principals, talked with staff, listened to frontline concerns, frontline experiences, taken positive action, not just moaned on social media. And I want to just refer to those few words in the motion that make it impossible to support. Calls on the worsened by the failure of the Minister of Education to develop clear and robust guidance for our school staff. And isn't that what this debate is really all about? It's about an attack only on the DUP minister. It's attack. I'll not give way, thanks, I've already given way. And it really is Sinn Féin looking for sound bites. However, the questions need to be asked. Is Minister McElveen going on a solo run on her actions? Is Minister McElveen consulting with her ministerial colleagues? Is Minister McElveen being irresponsible? And the answers to those questions is emphatically no. Emphatically no. The Minister took the matter, the strategy, as Mr Buckley has already referred to. The Minister took the strategy to the Executive on the 12th of August. It was discussed around the Executive table. It was discussed by Sinn Féin. Did they raise any objections? It was discussed by the SDLP. Did they raise any objections? It was discussed by Alliance. Did they raise any objections? No. All the ministers, the Executive, signed off on the guidelines issued. Now, I'm sure that the Ulster Unionists, when they come to speak, will indeed support their Minister, the Health Minister, and his responsibilities for the PHA and the close relationship that Minister McElveen has with the Health Minister and indeed with PHA. on these matters. And much was made by the proposer of the motion around CO2 monitoring. Now, I'm not technical, I don't know about CO2 monitoring. I understand the principle of what it's supposed to do. I've already given way on one. Sorry, I will give way.
Given what the minister or what the member has said about these processes having been already approved by the executive in August, and I'm assuming that's correct. I don't know, but I'm assuming it's correct because no one has risen to contradict him on that. If that is so, then does it not suggest that this is not only a stunt debate, but a debate which illustrates the risible dysfunctionalism of an executive, where one lead party tables a motion to eviscerate a minister of another lead party? Any wonder this executive lacks any credibility.
Member's got 10 seconds.
Sorry, I will finish, Mr. Speaker, by saying that CO2 monitoring, if it is agreed, then the Finance Minister needs to step up to the plate on the cost. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the member for that. Daniel McCrossan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the proposer of this motion for bringing it forward today. The SDLP were very happy to sign it in light of the considerable challenges faced in our schools. I have to say from the outset, Mr. Speaker, I want to say it is very disappointing that we find ourselves again in this situation to discuss another monumental failure by the Department of Education and, unfortunately, by another minister in appropriately planning for the pandemic and its impact on schools and our children's learning. And very clearly, the minister will know over the last week principals in her constituency and right across Northern Ireland have been at desperation points in looking for support, help and guidance, and they find themselves in a very, very intolerable situation. I had hoped that, Minister, you would have learned from the mistakes of your predecessor on how important it is to have robust and properly evidenced plans in place and clear monitoring mechanisms in order to keep our children and staff safe while mitigating disruption to learning in the classroom. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case to date from the information that we have all received that has found ourselves in this position today. Be in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, our schools, our teaching staff, our principals are facing crisis conditions with patients wearing very thin as they continue to be expected to work under increasingly intolerable conditions. One principal at 6 o'clock yesterday sat in tears with me for an hour at breaking point. A person that I consider to be very, very strong, that can almost handle any situation, forced into a very difficult position by the pressure burdened on her by the current guidance in its current form. These principals are required to be experts in COVID-19 tracking and tracing, while also delivering the highest teaching standards as expected. It is painfully clear that once the level of infections in the community reaches certain points, schools cannot do both jobs in teaching and mitigating against a difficult situation. In recent days, we have reached and exceeded that point, but our Minister and the Department have failed to act to repair the situation quickly enough, with the exception of the PHA moving in more recent hours. It took overwhelming pressure from MLAs of this House, parents and the media to force the hand of the DUP Minister once again. Like others in this chamber, I have met with principals across West Tyrone, and I spoke to principals right across every constituency in Northern Ireland over the last number of weeks, those who were anxious about the return of schools and those who have been forced into very difficult situations since the return of schools. The track and trace guidance that is being expected to be followed by schools is not fit for purpose. I think that is widely accepted from comments made so far. It is a logistical headache for teachers, and ultimately it is letting our school staff, parents and pupils down very badly. It isn't acceptable, Mr. Speaker. The SDLP for well over a year now have been calling for a robust plan to tackle all things COVID-related in our schools. That robust plan hasn't materialised. There has been no contingency planning, as confirmed in the Education Committee yesterday by officials, and so we are left with a complete mess, as many people have witnessed over the last number of days. Mr. Speaker, we learned at this week's Education Committee that the North of Ireland is the only jurisdiction where schools are required to do the contact tracing. Why was that, Minister? Why was principals put in that position to begin with? Everywhere else, it was being done to the PHA. Considering the disruption to learning contact tracing is causing in schools by taking principals and teachers away from education to perform the administration around contact tracing instead of actually teaching, why has it taken so long to act? And again, why was it put there to begin with? And indeed, yesterday, we witnessed the move finally by the PHA to take over contact tracing here as well. It is welcome, and I will welcome it, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. While this is a welcome move, it begs the question why the Minister and the Department deviated from all other jurisdictions and created their own guidance, which has proven to be absolutely unworkable by those at the coalface, those in our classrooms and at the front of our schools. It also begs the question of whether the PHA has capacity to support every school in Northern Ireland and what additional resources will be directed to tracking and tracing in schools to make it workable over the next few weeks. I do hope that quality planning around these practical matters has been conducted and discussed, and we look forward to seeing more detail. Also, Mr Speaker, it is very clear that the Day 2 and Day 8 testing is not working, because children who are getting tested on Day 2 are proving to be negative, but by Day 8 positive, and in between that have interacted with a lot of students and children as well, which is leading to a mass rise in the levels of infection within our schools, ultimately making schools unsafe, because this guidance is not workable and needs to be reviewed. Again, Mr Speaker, I'm limited in time. The DUP are obviously on the one path today, so I'll not allow it. And finally, Mr Speaker, in terms of PCR testing, it is very, very clear that there wasn't proper discussions between the Minister for Education and the Minister for Health around the PCR testing. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been the crisis situation we had this week, where parents couldn't access PCR testing and had to travel up the country or further afield, leaving work and otherwise. And also, finally, can someone please have a conversation with the PHA to ask them to return calls to principals who are at breaking point this week, because as of yesterday, quite a number of them, after 2 days, have still not received a call back to answer their concerns. This needs to be resolved, Mr Speaker, and I hope this Minister does resolve it. But as a word of advice to the Minister and to the DUP, I sincerely hope they don't take the Ministry in the next mandate, because they're doing harm to children's age.
Order. Mr Stalford, order. Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the authors of the motion in the first instance, just for bringing it to the Chamber. And we will be supporting the motion. I do get the point that my colleague from the committee made with regard to the line in there which seems to point the blame directly at the Minister. But I'd like to remind everybody in here that the purpose that we're in politics is not to serve our parties or serve a single purpose other than the people of Northern Ireland. And what I would hate to see happening today is an intensification of the fear that is now gripping our schools. Okay? So it's very important. The words with regard to getting a look for Mr Alistair, but this is key, guys. Yes, absolutely.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way, because that actually provides a useful segue to the point that I was trying to make to the member for West Tyrone, but which he didn't want to hear. It's my understanding that attendance rates last week shows an overall in-school attendance rate of 94%, which is actually higher than at this point last year, and does not sit with the image of chaos, or the vision of chaos that the member for West Tyrone sought to portray in his contribution.
The member has an additional minute.
Thank the members for his point, and it illustrates something for me here. We're still in the midst of this COVID pandemic, and whilst he is correct, one of the things that emanates from this chamber is the difference in attitude to taking risk. And whilst I agree with you, there are members of your own party who are prepared to take much more risk. Not the Education Minister, but there are people who have been calling for a relaxation of the COVID restrictions for the economy and things like that, and I think you'll take that in the round. My background is in risk assessment in the fire service, but I also know of the need to appropriately appoint those people to deal with that risk. And that's where I have the issues with the guidance as it was. But I'm grateful to the Minister that she has been working with the PHA and my Minister to revise that guidance, because it was never the case that principals and school leaders should have been doing the contact tracing. And that has been something in particular that Graham Galt and NAHT and the other teaching unions and teachers leaders for over a year now have been asking to be addressed. And now it is going to be addressed, and that has to be welcomed. But what also is engulfing people is the fear of what's happening in our schools. And we need to be very accurate when we talk about the risks that are there, because the Public Health Agency and our school leaders are telling us that schools are a safe place. That's not the problem, guys, and let's not conflate what the issue is. The issue is the burden on our teachers, the burden on our the burden on our teachers, the burden on our children, and in particular children with additional needs, because we are agreed in this chamber that the best place to have our children is in school. Okay? Now, but we have to be collegiate and collective in how we address that. And hopefully the executive today will come to the right conclusion and how they do that, because in the committee we will talk about, I know Mr Sheehan's brought up very rightly, the contingency planning that needs to happen for exams. We have the transfer test, which may or may not happen. I hope that the contingency plans are addressed. But there are practical steps that we can take, and one of the things that we have been talking about is ventilation. And I have been asking for, again, I'll go back to having the right people in the room to do that. At the Education Committee meeting yesterday, we asked the departmental official about ventilation, and they said it's in the guidance that school leaders can open a window. Well, listen, they're not ventilation experts. And what I'm saying, if we want our children to be in school safely, let's have a full ventilation assessment of our school property. And if it means going to the Finance Minister and saying, is it £20 million, is it £10 million, let's make sure our schools are the safest place for our children and for the pupils, because we don't want to be getting to the same debates this time, in June, May next year, about exams and what we're going to do about results and how that's going to pan out. We now have hindsight, we now have experience. I'm going to let the member from West Tyrone in.
I thank the member for kindly giving way. The member is right, schools are safe places, but they're safe places because our teachers and our principals have pushed themselves to breaking point over the last year to ensure that that is exactly the case. And all of them are saying, and will the member agree with me that all of them are saying, to him as well as me and others, that schools are being made unsafe by this unworkable guidance that has been forced on them, that they've been forced to implement in schools.
So with regard to certainly the communication I'm having with teachers, none of them have been saying that schools are becoming unsafe in terms of the COVID risk. What they're becoming unsafe is because of the fear and because of the impact on teachers and school leaders to actually administer and look after their classes and the additional workload. I was touched on about the mental health, guys. We've been debating mental health and mental health issues now for a number of years, and that's one of the things that's being impacted at the moment. And the guidance as it was not fit for purpose because it was having an impact, not just on the mental health of the pupils, but on the mental health of our school leaders too. But I think we need to look at the guidance that's going to be issued, hopefully later on today or tomorrow. There has been a tacit acceptance by the unions at this stage that they are broadly in favour. But there are other things that we're going to need to do, guys, to keep our pupils in the schools. And we need to be agile, we need to be communicating, we need to make sure that everybody is in the conversation. But I would urge the Minister that in all of these technical issues, whether it's health or ventilation, that the right people have the responsibility to address those. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call Chris Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this opportunity that the Assembly recall presents for the Assembly to engage with a Northern Ireland Minister for Education on a significant challenge facing our schools here in Northern Ireland. I regret that an Assembly recall was necessary to make this engagement possible, and I believe this is the fourth time a DUP Education Minister has been recalled during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the DUP can present that as a targeting of an Education Minister, or they can take some reflection with regards to the nature of engagement that has taken place between this Assembly and the education portfolio. I think at this time we need calm and measured leadership, so I'll do my best to be as measured as I can today, Mr. Speaker. As I say, I think the DUP can pass this off as party politics or misrepresent it as a responsibility for the executive alone, but I would respectfully ask that they recognise the seriousness of this matter and change course. The Education Minister must recognise that the failure to at least communicate and implement the new pupil test, trace and isolation policy properly has caused significant concern and distress for teachers, parents and pupils across Northern Ireland. It is quite clear that a number of school leaders, some in my own constituency, which the member from East Belfast appeared not to recognise earlier, do lack confidence in the new pupil isolation guidance and consider that the testing and tracing capacity necessary for it to function was not adequately planned or implemented. School leaders have been overwhelmed by tracing responsibilities. The testing capacity for pupils was not in place for many. I think what is of most concern, however, Mr. Speaker, is the lack of communication from the Education Minister and, to be fair, from some other ministers over the summer months in relation to this and other matters that do affect the capacity for children to attend school, and that needs to be addressed. There is an opportunity for the Education Minister today, and at the Joint Education and Health Committee, I am proposing to urgently and openly communicate the scientific and medical rationale for the new pupil isolation guidance, what, if any, alternatives are being considered to that guidance. For example, a differentiation between household and non-household contacts is being raised by many people, and also how the testing and tracing capacity it would require to function will be delivered and put in place. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the key aims for education are clear. It's the safety of our school population maximising in-school learning, and ensuring that contingency arrangements are in place if attendance is not possible for any reason. We know. I'll give way briefly. Yeah.
In relation to testing and tracing, in regards, what specific measures were put in place for special needs schools? There's unique circumstances there, and if the PHA does take over track and tracing, what measures will the PHA put in place to ensure, in regards to special needs schools, that those unique circumstances are taken into consideration?
Very grateful for that intervention. It's my understanding that some special arrangements have been put in place for special schools, particularly in different forms of testing. However, it's my understanding that there are special educational needs pupils in mainstream schools that need access to those different arrangements as well, and are experiencing some trauma by not having different arrangements in place at this time. The Children's Law Centre has issued a statement warning that children with special education needs are being forgotten again in this stage of the pandemic, as they were unacceptably in other stages. So it would be good to hear from the Education Minister on those particular issues today. Another key action that can be taken is indeed the delivery of enhanced ventilation and air quality in schools via the provision of CO2 monitoring and air filtration devices. My colleague and Alliance Party leader Naomi Long first requested such provision in the summer of 2020, and yet Northern Ireland remains behind other jurisdictions on this matter, such as Wales, where a £6 million air quality fund has been allocated. There's also a need, of course, for comparative data on pupil infection and attendance rates to assess the safety and functionality of any approach to the new school term. But the initial experience of teachers, pupils and parents and guardians does suggest that there is need of much clearer communication and perhaps even review. Mr Speaker, the Education Committee heard that community transmission is also impacting on the ability of our children to attend school. So we respectfully request also for the Health Minister to communicate clearly on what is being done to bring that community transmission that is impacting the attendance of children in school under control. The children of Northern Ireland have sacrificed a great deal during this pandemic, and it is time to set out clearly from the Education Minister, the Health Minister, the Chief Medical Officer, an understandable and deliverable plan that will keep our children safe and in school. Thank you.
I get a call, Colm Gildernew.
As the second week of the return to school closes, there are only two words to describe the situation children, parents and school staff find themselves in, which is confused and ill-prepared. The Minister of Education clearly has a responsibility to ensure schools are supported in relation to this pandemic. However, the PHA also have a clear responsibility here. And while I welcome the recent announcement that the PHA will now take up the contact tracing, I would caution members that, and the Minister that may not resolve it, and I would have some concerns around the PHA's capacity. I have outstanding questions in with the Department in relation to that capacity, and I have to say that given the levels of transmission referred to, I would still be concerned. This week I have been inundated, as I'm sure all the members have, with letters and phone calls from principals, teachers and parents who are in a state of disbelief that the Department and the agencies tasked with preparing schools for education in the COVID age have failed to do so. I have to say I share that sense of disbelief that the summer months, and indeed the months preceding the summer months, were not used to put in place the apparatus we knew would be needed to facilitate a smooth start to the school year. We owed our teachers and students that much, following the insecurity they have endured throughout the months of this pandemic. The summer months were a time and an opportunity to set up a robust find, test and trace system specifically tailored towards the education setting. The Department of Education and the PHA have apparently wasted that valuable time and space and have failed to do what was so obviously and badly needed. The Department of Health's own modelling did inform us of the scenarios that we could expect at this point in time, and what the measures will be needed to open schools safely and effectively as possible. Instead, we have a situation where school principals have been asked to carry out contact tracing, and that has took up huge amounts of their time and created huge anxiety. We also have children being sent home with suspected COVID symptoms who cannot get the PCR test they need close to their home, and parents are required to drive long distances to access the needed and indeed anxiously awaited tests. And I will say I have direct experience of this. My own child was sent home as a result of a close contact, and on the day that he was sent home, I couldn't book tests any closer than Antrim or Randalstown. So, members, that is a reality that has to be grappled. We also have children returning to school with a negative test, even though they've been in close contact with a positive case. And, as referenced by my colleague Nicola Brogan, we see no evidence of investment in the ventilation that we know would be needed in school settings, and we have known for a long period of time. And indeed, regrettably, members, we see no evidence that any learning is taking place as we head into the 20th month of this pandemic. As we work our way through the pandemic, our schools, and indeed our entire communities, deserve support and the best efforts of those of us charged with the decision-making that impacts on the lives of everyone. We must remain open to all possible solutions. We must, I believe, also look to best practice around the world to see what is working for others, and not to follow along doggedly with poor decision-making where we could be doing better. Indeed, I believe and have believed all along throughout this pandemic, we should be using the undoubted talent and skills of our population and of our workforce to lead across this island and across this world in terms of what we're doing, and not to wait and follow anyone, because time is not on our side dealing with a virus of the nature of coronavirus. So decisions need to be made, and this is a crunch time, and we need to avoid uncertainty or recklessness. People out there who are watching this debate today, and I think it's very clear that there's a huge amount of concern, and it's appropriate that we're here today discussing it, reflecting that concern and taking actions to deal with it. Critically, we urgently need to see a decision on the availability of vaccines for the 12 to 15-year-old cohort. Data from earlier this week has shown that the highest percentage of individuals testing positive are aged between the age of 10 and 14. An informed decision is needed on the vaccination for these younger cohorts. The Minister of Health should look to the experience of other countries and other areas like the south of Ireland, France and Germany. And the Irish Times this week has reported that the vaccination of younger cohorts is linked to the downward trend in positive COVID-19 cases. So the Minister also needs to look at the advice from European Medical Agency and Centres for Disease Control. And the Department for Education and Public Health Agency must now, at pace, work together to deliver a safe education system for our children, those who teach and support them in our school communities and for wider society. And Sinn Féin will continue to provide that leadership at this time to our community.
Time's up. Thank you. And I call Diane Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to put on record my thanks and gratitude to our school leaders, teachers and staff for all of their work during these difficult times, and thank them indeed for their efforts over the past 18 months. But I also rise today to unequivocally and unashamedly say that ensuring that our schools remain open safely with our children inside their classrooms must be our top priority. And I have listened very carefully to the debate so far today, and I would caution the member for West Tyrone, who seems in his political charge against the Minister to be engendering a fear of safety within our schools. This will harm the most precious of our population and will be judged harshly by the community there. No, I've a lot to get through. Mr. Speaker, I also want to ensure that our children have a holistic experience of school, enjoying the benefits of all aspects of school life, not a limited, partial return which denies our young people access to the rounded educational journey that they need. It is beyond doubt that the best place for our young people is safely in school with their peers, learning together. And it is a tragedy that so many of our young people are reporting increased mental health issues, isolation, and feelings of loneliness. We all know the damage that has been done for the disruption of the last 18 months to children right across Northern Ireland, and it is vital and clear that a clear and unambiguous message comes from this Assembly today that others in this chamber also share our desire in keeping schools open. As an Assembly and an Executive, we have a responsibility to work together to reassure families, teachers and parents that schools are safe as evidenced by extensive research, and not engage in political hyperbole, which seems to serves to cause more distress and uncertainty at a time when it can least be afforded. Mr. Speaker, as others have said, it is important to remember that the current guidance was a unanimous decision of the Northern Ireland Executive by all ministers, including by the party of the proposer of the motion, not just the Minister for Health and the Minister for Education. That is the collective spirit that our constituents want continued, working together to ensure the safe, sustained return of pupils to school. And that is why I welcome the allocation last week by the Education Minister of the £5.6 million for schools to deal with the ongoing COVID pressures. That is why I welcome the collaborative working by the Education and Health Minister to identify solutions and deliver practical help and support to our schools. The adoption of responsibility for contact tracing by the Public Health Agency is an important step, allowing teachers and staff to focus on empowering our young people, ensuring those who can least afford to fall behind in their education are not disadvantaged. Health guidance must be fit for purpose, and it must ensure that the widespread disruption in our schools is avoided. The approach to and availability of testing must be addressed urgently, and I would welcome the Minister outlining any possible changes that can be made to ensure this from either the Department of Health or the Department of Education. Mr. Speaker, quite rightly so, this is a touchstone issue for the people of Northern Ireland. Countless parents, pupils, educators and school leaders that I have spoken to in recent weeks all spoke with one voice. They want to see pupils in school, they want to see them learning together, they want additional support, and they want problems solved. That is what the Minister has been doing. What they don't want is battles for media spotlight, schools used as political footballs, and pupils denied access to education, and those who can least afford it falling further behind in their educational journey. Mr. Speaker, we all have a responsibility in this chamber to show leadership and work collectively to meet these challenges. Important steps to meet the pressures have been taken, and I know the Minister will continue to work with all the stakeholders to ensure that children are safe in school and can continue their education.
Member, time's up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. And I call Jerry Carroll.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Rise in support of the motion. Thank the members for bringing it today. Once again, school children, teachers, classroom assistants, school staff and parents have great cause to be concerned about COVID rates in this pandemic and government inaction. Indeed, the COVID rates are startling, given how long ago this pandemic reached us. One study in recent weeks indicated that 1 in 40 people here might have COVID, and this was before, obviously, schools reopened. The way education in schools have been left, frankly, it's more like a dog's dinner. And one would think that in this context, all efforts will be made on behalf of the Education Minister and by the Minister and the wider executive to anticipate difficulties that are now mounting in schools. One would think that efforts will be made to ensure safety of staff and children through clear guidance as well as practical support, such as rigorous moves to ensure ventilation. One would think that clear lines of communication between schools and health authorities would have been developed and that a robust form of track and trace and isolation regulations would have been developed by now. It is disappointing but sadly unsurprising that the current Education Minister has followed the practice of her predecessor and done very little in reality to address these serious concerns. It is frankly embarrassing that executive colleagues are making a last-ditch effort to intervene following outcry from teachers and their unions as well, and it seems that the summer was definitely wasted in that regard. I believe we should have taken our lead from the trade unions and representatives of workers on the front line then and now, who are doing their best to not only protect our members but crucially children and their families. And when I've spoken to staff, the frustration there is palpable and really beggars belief that they were forced and told to do contact tracing. This speaks volumes about the Minister's view of the PHA as well. Constant disruption to teaching, no practical support in terms of ventilation such as CO2 monitors or air filters, no clear instruction leaving principals to make difficult decisions themselves about isolation in individual schools, no contingency measures, or planning for exams like transfer tests, concerns about pay for substitute teachers. We have to isolate, the list goes on and on and on and on. This is what we have come to expect from this executive during the pandemic. Pandemonium in our schools, care homes, hospitals, while the main focus is put not on guaranteeing safety of workers, but getting those workers into workplaces that may be unsafe. 18 months on and you still can't get it right. I'm calling the Minister today to convene an emergency meeting of teachers, principals and the unions to hear concerns and to pull out all the stops to address them head on. And I want to ask the Minister today in her comeback, will she commit to do that today? And if so, how urgently will she commit to doing that? Thank you.
Thank you. I call Christopher Stalford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I direct the House to my declaration of members' interest. I'm a governor of Braniel Primary School. Firstly, I would like to pay tribute to the teachers, classroom assistants and caretaking staff who are working in our schools to keep our schools open, to keep our schools safe, to ensure that our children and young people have access to their education, which they have been denied for a very, very long period of time as a consequence of the pandemic. I also wish to pay tribute to the pupils and the young people who have had to persevere with their education under extremely trying and difficult circumstances. I think we should start with first principles. And for me, the first principle here is that children should, insofar as is possible, be allowed to attend school in order to further their education. It is accepted that there is no substitute for classroom learning and the classroom learning experience. It therefore is incumbent upon us to ensure that all of our children have access to that experience. Research has also demonstrated that when schools close, those who are hit hardest by such closures are children from poor and less well-off backgrounds. It's therefore absolutely essential to protect those children, that we have as much classroom learning as is possible. Turning to the issue under debate here, the issue has been flagged and concerns have been expressed. The Minister, in conjunction with the Minister for Health, is now moving to address those concerns. So, in many respects, beyond political grandstanding, and it's always a joy to watch the member from West Tyrone go from 0 to 8.0 on the Richter scale during any debate, but beyond the political grandstanding, it's actually quite a moot motion now, because the concerns that have been expressed in it, the Minister for Education and the Minister for Health are moving jointly to address. I'm happy to give way to Mr Gildernew.
Would the member agree with me, and I'm picking up on your reference to the fact that the Minister has a lot on her in tray and a lot to deal with at the present time, and you referenced grandstanding, and can I say that it's crucial that this Assembly remains focused and Executive remains focused on dealing with these issues rather than reckless grandstanding outside of this chamber today? Thank you.
The member has an additional minute.
Thank you. Who could believe that was a representative of the party that kept us down for 3 years without devolution? But anyway, let's not pretend that the other parties, including some of those who brought this motion today, were in the dark about the situation. The paper, as has been referenced by other speakers in this debate, paper was agreed at the 12th of August executive meeting, and all parties were present at that meeting. Mr Little.
For giving way. Would the member accept that in dismissing the concerns being presented by parties here today, he's dismissing concerns of teachers and parents and pupils across Northern Ireland? And the key question is one of communication. The medical and scientific rationale for the new pupil social isolation policy, I think that's a legitimate request.
Not in any way dismissing those concerns. Not in any way dismissing those concerns. But that's why it's so reckless to then have Mr McCrossan declare schools are safe, but then in the next, I know you're not, but then in the next sentence declare they're also unsafe. We have to give our people an assurance, and we have to not encourage public panic. I'm not suggesting that the Chair of the Health Committee has done that, but other utterances over the course of the period of time have added to the anxiety and the concern the legitimately held concerns of parents and of teaching staff. The Department for Education has various responsibilities. It's responsible for preschool, it's responsible for primary school, it's responsible for post-primary, it's responsible for special educational needs, it's responsible for youth policy, it's responsible for community relations inside and between schools, and it's responsible for teacher education and salaries. It's not responsible for public health. And this is a public health issue, and therefore it's right that the Health Department and the Public Health Agency have been brought in to assist in this matter, because it is out with the core values of the Department of Education to be dealing with a public health issue. So I welcome the cooperation between Minister McElveen and Minister Swan, and they have actually demonstrated what executive cooperation should look like, because there are issues that are cross-departmental in nature. I welcome the fact that practical solutions are now being put in place. I know that other members, including Mr Sheehan in the past, has expressed concern about the capacity of the Public Health Agency to carry out their functions. And I understand and accept that, and it will be our job to hold the PHA's feet to the fire on these issues to ensure the best outcomes. But I think it is important to recognise that the concerns have been raised, legitimate concerns. The Minister is moving to address them. The worst thing that we could do on an occasion like this is frighten people and make them afraid to send their children to school, because schooling and classroom learning is so important, and we are now in a situation in this country where there are kids in P3 who haven't had a full year of schooling. That can't go on.
Thank the member for that, and I call Justin McNulty.
I want to begin today by recognising that we are 20 years on from that terrible, terrible day on the 11th of September 2001, when terrorists flew jetliners into the Twin Towers in downtown Manhattan and into the Pentagon. We all know someone, or someone whose auntie, or someone whose nephew, or someone whose cousin died on that fateful day. I want to offer my sympathies to the families of the more than 3,000 or the 3,000 people who lost their lives on that terrible, terrible day. Gura Solis Navlihas Uru. This week, and 18 months on since the onset of this pandemic, I've spoken to a number of principals from across my constituency, in mainstream and in special schools. Those conversations have highlighted and reinforced the challenges, the concerns and the fears of our school leaders. Our education system has been plunged into chaos, and schools feel that they have been totally abandoned by the Education Minister and her department. I'm stunned not only by the lack of leadership on display, but by the abdication of responsibility, which has been demonstrated by those in positions of leadership. A key area of contention has been the testing guidelines issued by the department for the new academic year. Last year, those who tested positive, as well as those who were close contacts, were required to isolate for 10 days. This year, those close contacts can return to school if they provide a negative PCR test after 2 days, with an expectation that they will take another PCR test on day 8. School principals have raised many concerns in relation to this guidance. There is a critical issue with the supply and access to PCR tests. Of course.
Just to repost that question, the legitimate question that's being asked of me, I presume of the member as well,
member is in a seat.
Can we get a clear communication of the safety with regards to children returning to school when they are PCR negative after day 2? There may be a legitimate answer to that question, but we just don't seem to be able to get it for some reason. Thank the member for giving way.
The member makes a very valid point, and that
member has an additional minute.
That issue does create further chaos, almost, because instead of having to isolate for 10 days, some pupils may actually end up having to isolate for 30 days because of that system. So PCR tests, whilst some pupils are checking on their mobile phones as soon as they've been sent home to try and get a PCR test, they've been found that they've only accessed PCR tests in Enniskillen or even Wales in some instances. The lateral flow tests aren't being accepted as appropriate mechanism for establishing COVID positive status, and principals are a bit confused as to why they cannot be utilised more readily. But then they are not laboratory tests, so they aren't as reliable as the PCR tests. School principals have also told me that there are a huge number of instances in which staff are testing negative after a 2-day PCR test and testing positive on day 8, thus plunging the school community into deeper chaos. And as I said, some children are actually being forced to miss more school than they would have if they had only had to isolate for 10 days. Principals cannot understand how teachers can teach a class in the classroom and simultaneously teach a class remotely at home. It's just an impossibility. And principals, teachers and parents are worried about someone who has a positive PCR test at home, but their sibling or siblings are able to go to school, and how that can stand up to scrutiny and how that makes sense. When challenged yesterday at the Education Committee on these guidelines and their efficacy, department officials were reluctant to offer clear guidance because they didn't want to speak as to what the health experts might say. If senior government officials are unable to provide clear insight into these issues, how are school principals expected to do so? In fact, when pressed, one department official said that updates and guidance in relation to testing was being tweeted out, I think sent to schools at the end of the summer, and was sent through the normal channels. That to me does not seem normal. In these extraordinary and unprecedented times, that seems to me bizarre. Many educators are having the entirety of their working day, and indeed their evenings and weekends, completely consumed by directing the administration of COVID cases, close contacts and issues with testing at their schools. I welcome the belated move to allow the PHA to now take control of the contract tracing, but there is still an enormous administrative burden in switching that across. That doesn't happen by flicking a switch. School communities have been left to fend for themselves without adequate resourcing or appropriate leadership from the department. We've been in the grips of COVID for 18 months now, so the question has to be asked, why on earth did the Minister and her department not anticipate these challenges coming down the tracks? Why did the Minister and the department not take every step possible to provide the necessary strategic leadership and adequate administrative resourcing to ensure that rather than serving as COVID administrators, schools could actually be educators and focusing their energy on being educators? Another critical issue at play here is the unavailability of teaching and support staff. That was being exacerbated by the GCSE registration debacle. Has caused enormous problems, not in relation to just alone teaching staff, but classroom assistants and help through all the staffing mechanisms of the school, cooks, chefs, etc. I know that's not necessarily a GCSE function, but resources is a major issue there in terms of access to staff. One principal actually described her day on Monday as being a day from hell. A day from hell. Her entire energy was focused on contact tracing. The leadership on show, or lack of leadership on show from the department, has been typified by the laissez-faire approach to these critical issues and is posing a clear threat to the long-term education of our children and young people. To add insult to injury, any feeble supports that have been offered to schools have been inaccessible.
Members' time's up. Thank you very much. Gormaga, thank you. I call Steve Aiken.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin, I wish to make a declaration of interest as being a member of the Board of Governors at a primary school in my constituency, and as unlikely as it may seem, parent of 2 primary school students. Well, they do teach me an awful lot, I can assure you of that, every single day. Mr. Speaker, the welcome return of pupils to school and the restoration of normal teaching, especially for those pupils approaching key exams, has been a key objective of our party and indeed everybody of this Assembly. Indeed, our Health Minister has been at the forefront within the Executive of putting forward practical approaches, along with the Public Health Agency, Department for Education and the EA, to allow the safe and managed return of pupils. You may, yeah.
Thank the member for giving way briefly. Would the member accept that there may be a need for enhanced communication around some of the scientific and medical rationale for some of those policies that have been put in place to balance safety and attendance in school?
Thank you very much indeed. And you've obviously been having the opportunity to read some of my notes as I've been going through it. But great minds think alike, but at least we do anyhow. However, it must be recognised that throughout this pandemic, the flow of information, there we go, that the Department of Education through the EA has on many occasions been less than exemplary. Regrettably, even I, as a member of the Board of Governors with an insight into the actual health guidance, and at one stage had a direct line to the Health Minister, has found it difficult to translate what was coming from the Northern Ireland Executive and the Public Health Agency, that what had been agreed to, into the information that managed to work its way into the Department of Education and the Education Authority and then worked its way down to schools. It is perhaps regrettably not coincidental that some teachers, after 18 months of less than, I'm afraid, clear guidance, are deciding to interpret the rules in their own way. The Minister now has the opportunity to put this right. She has the information she needs from her Chief Medical and Scientific Officers. She has the support of the Public Health Agency. And in our Health Minister, she has somebody who is committed to the health and well-being of our children. She can also better inform her party colleagues within the Executive of the provision of testing within schools, can update them on the widespread availability of lateral flow tests, and above all has the opportunity to look critically at the information flow to our schools to ensure that there is no longer confusion or inconsistencies in the public health messages to our pupils, parents and hard-pressed school staff. To conclude, Minister, while there are other growing crises around our political spectrum, on this particular issue, utilising the support already offered yesterday by our Health Minister, you can regain some much-needed trust by getting your department to take effective action for the pupils, teachers and parents across Northern Ireland. We can all work together to make this happen. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you for that, Mr Regan. And before I call the next speaker, I want to say I'm going to use the extended period allowed under the grace period to make sure that all the remaining speakers have an opportunity to contribute to the debate. But I will say that if anybody takes an intervention, you will not get an additional minute. That's just to facilitate all the remaining speakers. And I call Jonathan Buckley.
Beginning in speaking on this important matter today, I would like to pay tribute to teachers, to principals, to staff, to parents and indeed pupils. This has no doubt been a very difficult time for them, both in the classroom. I don't have an extra minute, so no. Both been a very difficult time for them in the classroom and indeed also for many parents. My position, and indeed that of the Minister McElveen and that of my party, is very clear. I want to see a continuous stream of our young people in our schools, in our classrooms, getting that face-to-face learning that they so desperately need. Listening to some of the comments from some of the members in this House, you would forgive me for thinking that they did not remember the devastating impact of a lack of face-to-face teaching in this past 18 months. Did they remember the rise in domestic violence? Did they remember the rise in anxiety? Did they remember the rise in mental health issues? We all know the benefits of face-to-face teaching. We know the physical and mental well-being of our young people is essential that they get that classroom face-to-face learning. And that is why it is so important that we be careful with the language that is used in this place. Mr McCrossan's angry man of education will only get him so far. It may help him get the airwaves, but it will do nothing to provide solutions to parents, to teachers, and indeed to our young people. In fact, I would go as far as to say it rises the anxiety of our parents, it rises the anxiety of our teachers, and indeed our pupils. It's time to calm the rhetoric. I will go as far to say some of the comments today have been irresponsible. Mr Speaker, meeting with local teachers as I have done, listening to parents in which we have all done, the messaging was clear. Firstly, teachers and indeed principals were talking about the COVID workload. I recognise that. The Minister has recognised that. And through deliberations and through contact with both teachers and indeed the Health Minister, they have addressed that issue through putting responsibility now to the PHA. I would go as far as to say, and Mr Shane will not be new to this topic as well, there does be some cause of concern as to the capacity within the PHA, and it's something that will have to be scrutinised by both the Health Committee and indeed Education if we are to find an amenable way forward. I want the teachers to be able to teach, and removing that requirement to test and contact trace is essential in doing that. Also, which was mentioned, was indeed the PHA messaging. One principal described it to me as terrible. Constant lack of information flowing to teachers, an array of messaging which meant different things to different people. We need clear, simple messaging, and I think that goes to the heart of what the Chair of Education is talking about in that communication chain. They also talked about testing availability, and I think that's something that we do need to consider going forward. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned today that I would like to bring reference to, and that is teachers and indeed parents have raised with me the constant cycle of testing. It's important to note that our schools are safe, that many of those that have been isolated and are at home are not at home because they have COVID, but at home because they have been sent home, whether they've been part of that isolation block or whatever, but they don't have COVID. And I think it's important that we instil a bit of confidence in our parents and indeed the teachers that that is not the case. So that is why I would say that we do need to look at the use of lateral flow testing, if it is to give confidence. Now, some members will shake their head and say that it is not as accurate. I accept that it is not as accurate, but if we go by the NHS website, it talks about a 99.9% accuracy. If it's good enough for entrances at emergency departments, good enough for use in daily care homes, if it's good enough for common travel area travel on a plane, good enough in our businesses and concerts and football, why not in schools? We have to recognise that a PCR test is an extremely intrusive way in which to find results in COVID-19 for our young people. I know some young people that have been traumatised when they get that day 2 test and wait for the day 8. So I think that is something that we need to bear in mind. It's less intrusive, it's quicker, and it's a time for a debate in which is managed and rational around the use of testing. So in closing, Mr. Speaker, the Minister has not risen to the political baiting from some within this chamber. Minister McElveen has not added a voice of hysteria on such a sensitive matter. Instead, she has got on with the job in lockstep with the Minister of Health to provide a calm and reassuring voice that, yes, there will be problems, and I have no doubt we will revisit this
time's
again,
up.
but we must be calm and rational when dealing with the issue
Member's
such
time's
important
up.
as education. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the member for that, and I call Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I have the 5 minutes without I'll not take interventions today. In advance of the recall, I contacted a number of principals to ask them how the back to school was going. I'm not here to moan, as Mr. Newton mentioned earlier. I'm here to provide their voices. I asked the principals to give me some of their words and their reflections. Now, some of this you'll recognise and will back up what others have said today. All of the principals wanted me to make it very clear that while there has been such bad press about schools and about the COVID situation, teachers and school leaders continue to prioritise pupil welfare. Teachers comply with clear and understandable communications. And Minister, it does come down to this, and others have said it here today, it's that clear and understandable communications that they have concerns about. That has not been going forward to them. One primary school principal in indeed the constituency that the Minister and I share sent me these words. The person said, unfortunately, it has been anything but a smooth return to school, as I have had to close the school yesterday and today. That was Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. Yesterday, I only had 6 available members of staff out of 18, and we're sitting at over 20 pupils testing positive out of 115 in the whole school. The principal confirmed we had a local principals meeting yesterday, and we all expressed our concern over the following: use of lateral flow tests versus PCRs. The message has not been clear enough, and parents think that a negative lateral flow test is enough evidence for pupils to return. The PHA guidelines are too confusing, and for a lot of parents, they have obviously been written by professionals for professionals. The principal said some politicians have been making ridiculous and inappropriate interventions that have only made things worse for principals. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of cases where parents have been aggressive and confrontational with principals due to this lack of clarity. Household contacts. We are deeply concerned that pupils can attend school even though there's a positive COVID case in the household. The guidelines state that the pupil can attend if they test negative on day 2 and get tested again on day 8. However, schools have reported a large increase in positive tests on day 8, meaning that these pupils have been in school with the virus. Many schools, including the entire, and I'll leave out the name just so I don't specify them, area principals group have insisted that all pupils isolate for 10 days if there's a positive household case. However, once again, this has led to conflict with parents. We feel that there are some politicians turning a blind eye to what is happening in schools in a rush to open up the economy. However, there are children, staff and families with medical needs who are extremely anxious at present and need protected. The principal concluded, I think school leaders should have been consulted on these guidelines prior to their implementation. And I would ask the Minister if she could confirm, how were they consulted before they were implemented? Another post-primary school principal outlined the challenges their school is facing, and they said, in terms of how school is running, things have been extremely busy with the COVID response and in particular the workload associated with the track and trace process. We know that the PHA is now going to step in, but what I will say is that principal went on to say that they have spent every evening and every weekend and they are exhausted. The principal said that following the Department of Education and PHA guidance, they're trying to follow that to the letter, that there's inconsistencies in the system. Some schools are insisting close contacts self-isolate for 10 days. This is causing confusion for parents who want to know why there are variations between schools and some schools are safer than others, their words. Some schools are also requesting that they see evidence of PCR tests. But we've been told by the Department of Education that schools should not be policing this and that we work on the basis of trusting our parents, which they have been doing. The cases we dealt with last week meant that we were waiting for PCR test results to come through over the weekend. So the whole leadership team and I managed the COVID phone line in shifts all weekend to respond to any positive cases. And while PHA will be taking that forward, how can you explain, Minister, how this is going to work for teachers? Because surely the teachers will be asked to provide the information through to PHA. Or is it parents that are going to provide it through the teachers? Or is it parents going directly to the PHA? We need clear information. The Minister allocated funding to manage the COVID response. With additional expenditure on hand sanitiser, additional cleaning and associated products, signage, teacher cover, etc., we will not be long working through this. So, Minister, I ask you to consider with those principals how this can work. The pressure on teachers will remain even though PHA will take on the track and trace. Teachers will still have to provide solutions and options and advice to parents. I ask the Minister to consider how to help those teachers.
Thank the member for that, and I call Alan Chambers.
Mr. Speaker, I have listened carefully to the debate today, and rightly most members have highlighted the unbearable pressure being placed on teachers and principals. It is a fact that school staff have been placed in an intolerable position. I believe that all of us also recognise the fact that our children are not mere statistics in this situation. They are suffering badly as well. With 11 grandchildren currently in various levels of our education system, I have been getting the impact on these children from their own mouths and also from their parents. This is in addition to the many emails and phone calls from constituents. 2 weeks into the new term, 3 of my grandchildren have been sent home from school because of a positive contact in their class. One who had just started school in P1 was sent home on just his second day. What must be going through that young mind? One at 7 years of age had to be held down by her mother to have a test carried out, which came back negative so that she could get back to school. What terror will the second test hold for that child? The third child is due to take his transfer test in coming months. He has already lost 3 days of education. Is that satisfactory preparation for such an important academic test? And how can teachers plan a schooling plan for their pupils? There is evidence that the vast majority of close school contacts sent home to isolate during the 2020-21 school year did not go on to develop COVID. Vaccinating post-primary students, which has been mentioned today, is a discussion for another day. The JCVI have declined to give a definitive judgment, but have invited the 4 UK Chief Medical Officers to discuss the issue and weigh up risk against benefit. We await the outcome of these discussions. I believe the proposals to transfer tracing back to the PHA will change the dynamics of the situation and will help calm the fears of school staff, parents and, importantly, our children. We all want what is best for our children. I believe transferring the tracing programme to the professionals is a step in the right direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the member, and I call Jim Allister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's no doubt that our schools are in a very fraught situation, and I know that as chair of the Board of Governors of my local primary school, and I declare that. And equally, there's no doubt that the present situation has not been functioning adequately, if at all. But listening to some speakers in this debate who seem intent on whipping up the fear of safety of our schools, I do have to say it sounds as if some would rather our schools were closed than anything else. And that has to be fundamentally wrong. Now, this hokey-cokey business of being tested, out to test, back in, out to tested, it is not working. I'm sure, like many other members, I've had so many parents in touch. One who told me their P6 pupil sent home on Friday for a test which took place on Sunday. On Monday, their P4 pupil sent home for a test. On Tuesday, their P2 pupil sent home for a test. And on Tuesday afternoon, the P6 pupil sent home for another test. Now, Mr. Chambers made a very pertinent point when he alluded to the trauma of that on young children. Young children who in most cases are going to be COVID-free, and yet they are subjected to the invasive test, building within them a mountain of fear. And that, I think, is an increasing problem. I've had parents talk to me on the basis, my child was terrorised by that, they won't go back to school, they don't want to go back to school, they're scared of another, and the parent's scared. If there's another test required, what happens? So we are dealing with tender young lives here, and I think it's easy sometimes to forget that. If our schools are to be open, and clearly they should be, then the presumption must be that children attend school. And therefore, I would have thought, yes, it might be more radical, I would have thought that the approach should be that a child that has symptoms is tested. If it's positive, it stays at home for the 10 days. But the other children continue to attend school. If they show symptoms, they are tested. And thereby we maintain a continuity of attendance for the far greater number within our school. And we alleviate our teachers of many of the impossible burdens put upon them. I welcome the fact that the PHA is now going to do it, but I still have that residual query. Are the teachers not still going to have the administrative burden of supplying all the administrative work to the PHA? How is that going to work? So I think it's important that we hear answers from the Minister on that specific. But I do say to this House that we should be putting first and foremost the education with the safety of our children. And I do believe that our schools overwhelmingly are safe locations for our children. And therefore this idea that at the first sign of someone anywhere in the class or school having any sort of symptom, it's everyone out. I don't think that is working, nor will it work. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we now bring the member Claire Sugden on screen, please? Can I invite the member to make her contribution?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon, members. I will declare an interest as a governor of a primary school within my constituency. I wish to dismiss the comments of other members who have suggested that this issue has been dealt with. I don't think it has, and I'll outline the reasons why I think that is the case. This is a cross-departmental issue and requires the 5 parties to recognise that they are indeed one executive. It is an issue for education, it is an issue for health, and it's an issue for economy and perhaps others as well. So I do agree with Mr Allister that it is disappointing to see the parties of government at odds with one another in this debate. You should be working together. I appreciate this is silly season in terms of an impending election. However, you still have a mandate until probably March 2021, and I think you need to take responsibility for doing the job that you all agreed to in January 2020. I wish to represent the views of those who have shared some comments about what has been happening since the resumption of school in the past number of weeks. I will start with schools. The previous policy, and I do appreciate the change in relation to the PHA, but the previous policy did place a significant burden on principals and school leaders. And I will quote directly from schools who contacted me earlier this week. And they said that the support offered to schools was wholly inadequate. Mr. Speaker, that's damning, and sadly it's a familiar criticism. It seems to be the criticism that we have heard throughout the past year, and the support that schools says just wasn't present. And I think certainly that's something that we need to reflect on moving forward. And I do agree with other members that this essentially is a communications issue. Schools are fully aware of the issues relating to their pupils and are willing to do what they can to try and support that, but they need support from government as well. And I really do implore the executive to look at their communications. It's not enough to say now, a year in, that this is unprecedented. You've had a year to try and improve this. And I think it's something that we need to genuinely get a grip on moving forward. The other concerns I'm hearing from parents and members just previous to me had mentioned it as well. The experience at the PCR testing centres is being described to me as horrific. Very young children are being subject to an invasive test where they are screaming. What are we doing to children where, in a situation because of current policy around contact tracing and around testing, that we are potentially subjecting kids to this type of testing once a week? And that's even if they can get a PCR test. I had a parent talk to me this morning who said to me that she tried to book a test, but because the PCR centres are so overwhelmed, that she was unable to get it. So she was then having to travel to Macrofelt to get a test, which in most cases was going to be negative. I agree with Mr McCrossan as well. The situation around the day 2 and day 8, potentially a negative test on day 2, sending those kids back into school where they could infect because it hadn't presented as a positive test. And then in day 8, they are being told that they have a positive test, which means everyone else within that classroom is then going to have to take a day off school and then have to take a test the following day. So we are perpetuating a cycle where we are regularly testing kids, and I just don't think it is good for their well-being, and particularly if we consider the risk around COVID-19 and particularly young people. I'm not an expert, I won't claim to be in relation to the effects of that, but that's something that we need to consider. Is our approach to this disproportionate to the risk that we are now facing within schools? I also want to make a point around parents. We are no longer in a lockdown situation. Parents don't have the flexibility to just take time off work. So this is why it's an economy issue. How are we in supporting working parents so that if there is a situation where they have to take their kid to get a test, perhaps several hours away from their place of work or even from their home because they can't get one locally because the system is overwhelmed? Are employers going to be sympathetic to that? I think a year on, I think the answer is no. And I think we really need to get a grip on what we even mean by a close contact. I appreciate what a close contact might be for adults and in an office environment, for example, but is it really a situation that a close contact has to be in a classroom situation? And indeed, I would ask the Minister of Health and the wider Northern Ireland Executive to reconsider these definitions. I think this is, an issue that we are going to be dealing with moving forward, because whilst the administration and the burden has been taken off principals, and that seems to be the focus of a lot of the concerns this week, I think we do need to look at it in the wider context of what this means for parents, for the children themselves, and how we do, I suppose, learn to live with COVID-19 within the community. I heard the previous First Minister say, nearly a year ago now, that we need to move towards a process where we look at this. And indeed, I would ask the Executive to do that. I do not underestimate the challenges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the member for that. I now call the Minister of Education, Ms Michelle McElveen, and the Minister has 15 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have listened to the views that have been expressed by members on this motion. And it is clear that all those present, including myself, want children to access their education in a safe environment. The high community prevalence of COVID-19 in Northern Ireland has led to an increased number of cases being reported by schools and a large number of children being identified as close contacts and asked to isolate and book a PCR test. This has resulted in major disruption to children's education. It's acknowledged that the COVID-19 pandemic, in particular school closures and COVID-related absences, have been very damaging to the well-being of children, including their mental health, their education and their long-term opportunities in terms of future employment and development. Children from more disadvantaged backgrounds have been particularly impacted. Many members in this chamber have pointed to this, and we have worked very hard to minimise the impact on pupils. I also recognise the challenges faced by families in having to manage children being out of school, either ill or self-isolating. It has to be a priority for all of us to have children in school where we all agree they should be. In particular, I want to recognise the work undertaken by school leaders, their boards of governors and staff since the start of the new academic year in supporting contact tracing. For many, this has been a very challenging time, with a lot of work undertaken over evenings and weekends to ensure that close contacts were identified. Schools were provided with guidance from the department as well as detailed advice from the PHA on the close contact and self-isolation and testing processes. My department's guidance reflected the agreed executive position that is based upon expert medical and scientific advice. The guidance itself was the subject of detailed engagement with officials from the Department of Health over the summer and took account of their views across a number of areas. My officials also worked closely with the practitioners group of school leaders and maintained engagement with trade unions. The department's guidance seeks to move away from the position where school leaders and staff were required to follow a detailed list of prescriptive requirements, often telling principals what either must or cannot happen in their school. This reflects the progress and the learning that we have all had in society in areas such as using face coverings, hand hygiene and testing since the start of the pandemic. This guidance also seeks to take advantage of the experience that has been developed by schools over the last 18 months. Principals have learned what has worked well in their school and what has worked less well. So where there is an opportunity to allow them to tailor their actions and mitigations to suit their own school's individual circumstances, I think that it's appropriate to allow principals the flexibility to do so. The Executive agreed on the 12th of August that school bubbles would no longer be required in guidance, that face coverings should still be worn by post-primary schools, pupils in classrooms, and set out changes to self-isolation requirements. In addition, PHA guidance resulted in pupils identified as close contacts only having to self-isolate until a negative PCR test was received, rather than for 10 days. The Executive agreed to the proposals brought forward by the Minister of Health that took account of the expert advice from the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor. Public Health Scotland published a research paper last week that examined the number of close contacts in schools that went on to be tested positive. It identified that only 7.9% of school year pupil contacts of a positive case subsequently tested positive themselves. A daily contact testing study in England, published during the summer, also found that in the participating schools, only 1.6% of those identified as close contacts went on to become confirmed cases within 14 days. These studies support the position taken by the Executive. Since schools returned for the 21-22 school year, the high community prevalence of COVID-19 has led to an increase in cases reported to schools, with large numbers of children being identified as school close contacts. This has caused disruption in schools, large numbers of children having to miss school, pressure on school leaders, and a high volume of calls to the PHA, which has struggled to respond. However, with high rates of the virus currently in the community, both the Department of Health and the Department of Education have recognised that the administrative burden on teachers is not sustainable. It was against this backdrop that my department has agreed with the Department of Health that schools would no longer be required to carry out the PHA's contact tracing work, and only in certain circumstances will a school be asked to assist. This more targeted approach, which will begin on Friday, will involve PHA contact tracing service identifying and asking the very closest contacts, for example very close friends, to isolate and get a test. Other contacts in school, such as those in the same class or who sit near the case, will not routinely be asked to isolate and book a test. School leaders will no longer be required to respond to every case and identify contacts. PHA will undertake the work and will only contact the school principal for assistance in limited circumstances. Parents will be asked to inform the school if their child tests positive, which could be part of school absence reporting. Detailed PHA guidance for schools will be prepared to support the revised approach. A warn and inform letter will be made available, which schools may use to inform parents of cases in the school and to remind everyone of the steps that we all should be taking to reduce the risk of COVID transmission in school and beyond. PHA will monitor the number of cases in schools and will continue to have arrangements to respond to and support schools with large clusters and outbreaks. This proposed approach is in line with the position being taken in schools in England, Scotland and Wales. Schools should continue to focus on the range of mitigations that they have in place to reduce the risk of COVID transmission, including cleaning, ventilation, face coverings, consistent groups and regular asymptomatic testing using lateral flow devices. Vaccination is available to all staff and to some students. A separate arrangement for special schools will be implemented which takes account of the particular needs and vulnerabilities of those settings. And while the overall burden will still be reduced, PHA risk assessments may mean that special school principals are contacted more frequently about cases than mainstream colleagues. This is a small operational change to the PHA process, which will have a positive impact on school workload. This reflects the current evidence on the risks posed to close contacts, which will result in fewer pupils having to isolate. I understand and accept that there have been and will continue to be difficult decisions taken on how best to support pupils and schools during the pandemic. There is a wide spectrum of opinion across stakeholders and society as to how this should be taken forward. There are still some disruptions to normal school life, such as post-primary pupils being required to wear face coverings in classrooms. However, the Executive is continuing to be informed by the expert medical and scientific advice as it takes decisions going forward, in the same way that my department relies on advice from the PHA and the Department of Health. While there is no guidance or set of rules that will please everyone, I believe that my department's revised COVID-19 guidance balances the need to keep all those within our schools safe with ensuring that they can access the full range of educational experiences. My department's revised guidance seeks to allow school leaders to lead. It moves away from being prescriptive to being as permissive as the public health advice permits. As always, we will listen to teachers, unions, parents, pupils and school governors and take on board their views. We will continue to respond quickly and adapt guidance to reflect any changes to public health advice. I trust school leaders to consider the policy guidance provided by my department, the self-isolation guidance provided by the PHA, and the operational guidance provided by the EA. There are also helplines available for them to raise any queries. With this information available, school leaders will then rightly be able to use a cautious, risk-based approach to the decisions involved in the everyday operation of their school. I've also heard today about the need to focus on the other mitigations in schools, and I believe that we have a balanced approach in our guidance. My officials are continuing to engage with colleagues in other administrations on the approach to ventilation, including the use of carbon dioxide monitors in certain circumstances. My department will be submitting a bid for capital funding to support provision of CO2 monitors more widely in schools. I also recognise the challenges presented by, in some instances, an ageing school estate. Indeed, last week I met with a school principal whose main building dates back to the 19th century and the associated difficulties that he has with windows, and we are working with EA in order to address those issues, and I hope that that is the same experience that will be rolled out across the school estate. We'll also continue to engage with EA on issues such as cleaning services and the provision of additional support to school leaders who need it. I'm also mindful that while we believe our measures are sustainable and schools will remain open, we must accept that there may be localised issues that need to be addressed. And should there ever be a need to take measures at the regional level, we have well understood escalation measures which were in place last year that we can reinstate. So in conclusion, as I've said at the start of my speech, I remain concerned about the impact of the pandemic on our children. I give members my assurance that I will continue to listen and act appropriately. There are a number of issues which have been raised today by colleagues which are very much fall within the remit of the Department of Health, particularly in respect of PCR testing, which I will give an assurance that I will raise directly with them. I am assured from advice that I have received from Health that the more targeted approach to contact tracing that has been agreed will result in fewer pupils having to self-isolate unnecessarily, and the range of mitigating measures will continue to ensure that pupils are safe in their school environment, being able to learn and socialise with their friends just as they should be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister, for that. Before we move on to the final speaker, I didn't want to interrupt the flow of the Minister's contribution and response, but it's not appropriate for members to continue seeking to make an intervention when it's clear that the member they're seeking an intervention from isn't agreeable to that. So I'm just making that point. It's actually start to get rude. I call Pat Sheehan to wind the motion, and the member has 10 minutes.
And to start off with, I had no desire to bring this motion and in the process trigger the recall of the Assembly. And this isn't a personal attack on the Education Minister. Neither is it an attack on her because she's a member of the DUP. I brought this motion forward because of the sheer number of school leaders, teachers and union reps who contacted me about the situation in our schools, asking me to do something. And I therefore thought it was important to bring the Minister into the chamber here and for all of us as MLAs to hold her to account. Quickly.
I thank the Deputy Chairperson for giving way briefly. It is to be noted that the first piece of detailed information on these issues was gained via, it required an Assembly recall. And the fact that a Minister won't take interventions and questions during a statement is of profound concern.
Thanks for that intervention. And I mean, I'm going to start off on one point of agreement. Let me get into this a few minutes and I'll let you in, Justin. The one point of agreement, everyone here has agreed that the best place for our children is in school. Everyone agrees with that. Our teachers and principals should be able to educate those children with as little disruption as possible. Classroom assistants, lunch supervisors and cooks, playground supervisors, bus drivers, caretakers and all who provide support in our schools should be able to do their jobs in an environment that is as safe as it possibly can be. And parents need to feel confident that their children are safe in school and that their education will only be disrupted if it's absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, there appears to have been very little planning done to ensure a safe restart of schools. What was done was confusing and woefully inadequate. And this was in spite of the warnings from experts over the last few weeks, if not months, that the return of children to school was going to lead to an increase in already high numbers of positive COVID-19 cases in society. Proactive interventions were required from the Minister. Instead, she took a completely hands-off approach and placed the burden of responsibility for dealing with coronavirus in schools on the shoulders of our school leaders. I'm sure the Minister, like the rest of us, has heard school leaders, union representatives and parents in the media over the past week or two. And I just want to say to the DUP reps who spoke here today, there's almost an inference in what you're saying that school leaders are overstating their concerns about what is happening in our schools. So, not just yet. I'll let you in later when I get through a bit of this. I'm sure the Minister has heard the anger and frustration, the demoralisation among school leaders and the sheer disappointment at her approach and the approach of her department. So I'll let Justin in at this point.
Thank the member for giving way. Firstly, it is not rude for me to be persistent about representing the concerns of my constituents. Secondly,
point of order, Mr. Salford.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The member is veering dangerously close to questioning rulings from the chair. Can you direct him that that is inappropriate?
Just going to come to that. You're very quick. McNulty, your seat, please. I made a comment a few minutes ago, which I stand by, and I will insist upon in the future, that whether the Minister should have responded or not is a separate question. The fact of the matter is, you, as one member in this chamber, repeatedly tried to insert yourself into an intervention. Well, it's quite clear that the member that you were asking for an intervention wasn't prepared to concede that. On that basis, then you should have desisted from that, and I will insist that you will do that in future. So please do not question the ruling of the Speaker. Resume your position.
Thank you for that clarification. I retain it wasn't being rude, and apologies for that, Minister, or for that, Mr. Speaker. Can the member agree with me that people, teachers, pupils, staff, they want consistency and clarity and guidance, they want adequate resourcing and support, they want access to testing when and where it is needed, and they want ability to continue education safely?
I agree with all of that, and I want to go on to the issues that have arisen since schools have reopened and that have been raised, and I presume with all of us here, by either teachers, school leaders, trade unions, parents or whoever. And first of all, the issue of contact tracing. Unlike other jurisdictions, as has been mentioned, the responsibility for contact tracing here falls to school leaders. In other jurisdictions, it's the PHA that carries it out. And I've lost count of the number of school principals who said they've spent their weekends and their evenings off involved in contact tracing. That's not their job. They're being taken away from their core duties and responsibilities of educating and safeguarding children. And there have been problems with testing for children who have come into close contact with a positive case. I spoke to one principal in my own constituency in the Falls, a deprived area, trying to get testing for a number of children who had come into close contact with someone. And they were being directed to Castlewellan. Others were being directed to Derry and others to Enniskillen. Of course, you might say that testing is the responsibility of the Health Department and the PHA. Why blame the Education Department? And as has been mentioned by a couple of speakers, I have serious issues with the PHA and locked horns with them on a number of occasions during the Health Committee. Indeed, I'm not here today to focus on the inadequacies of the PHA, and that's for others to deal with. But it emerged yesterday at the Health Committee that there had been no discussions whatsoever between the Education Department and the PHA in the run-up to the restart of schools. Why did the Education Department not make sure there was sufficient testing capacity to deal with any upsurge in numbers? Why did they not argue for a bespoke testing regime for schools? Another issue. Jonathan, go ahead.
Thank the member for giving way, and I know the issue of the PHA and testing is something that he has raised on numerous occasions. Far from dismissal of teachers' concerns, I can reassure the member, indeed the House, listening to teachers' concerns was a priority. Given the COVID workload that they had highlighted, it was vital that that was addressed, and we have seen now that we have gone some way to addressing that in moving to the PHA in terms of contact tracing. Would the member agree with me that the PHA messaging is an area of serious concern for many teachers and indeed parents. And if we are to deal with this issue going forward, not only capacity but indeed information must be free-flowing. And I would agree with me further that the Committee for Education and indeed Health should also be coming together to scrutinise the PHA's work going forward on this.
I agree with that. It's very disappointing that the PHA have been absent from the media over the past while. But another issue that emerged at the committee yesterday was that there is no planning, or no planning has taken place in relation to forthcoming exams, including GCSE modules and the post-primary transfer, should there continue to be disruption in schools. Parents, teachers and children are impatient excuse me, waiting for direction on this issue. Why should, for example, P7 pupils be treated differently from P7 pupils last year? Where are the contingency plans? And quickly...
Totally agree with the member, and the member will agree, I hope, that what we heard yesterday at the committee suggests that there is in fact no contingency planning, that in the event of X we get Y. Where is the plan going forward to protect our children's education? The member agreed that that's a worrying situation?
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, in terms of other mitigations that could have been put into schools for the restart, the only mitigation outside of the general advice that is offered to everyone was that schools should open their windows. And how does that work? And the Minister herself raised the case of a school, and I was speaking to someone the other day as well, where the windows are actually painted shut. There are that many layers of paint, the school is so old, the windows can't open. And what happens on a day of a gale force wind and driving rain in terms of opening windows? Wales, as we have heard, have already made £6 million available for carbon dioxide monitors and air filtration systems. So these are issues that should have been dealt with and weren't dealt with. And one of the big complaints from the schools that I have spoken to on this issue is around the guidance being unclear and in some cases contradictory. And the aim of the guidance, according to the papers we received yesterday, was to support schools to provide the best possible education and service to children and young people while reducing the risk of COVID-19 transmission. Clearly, the Minister has failed in that respect. Provide clarity with regard to practical approaches for the safe operation of schools. There's absolutely no clarity. There's confusion and chaos. And, I mean, today we're talking about how we're going to deal, and I acknowledge that the Minister has taken some steps to deal with a number of the issues that have been raised, and it takes a lot more than has already been done. But while we're here discussing how to deal with problems, there are others outside this Assembly talking about trailing down the institutions. You know, at a time when we're in this pandemic crisis, when benefits are going to be cut, when taxes are going to be raised, and the most deprived in society are going to be disadvantaged further, it's time for us to get to work and do the job for our constituents.
Members to quit. Members, the question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Clear the lobbies. The question will be put in 3 minutes. Okay, members. Okay, members. The question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. Do we have tellers? Do we have tellers? Okay, members. Order, members. Resume your seats, please. Thank you. Tellers for the ayes are Nicola Brogan and Pat Sheehan. Tellers for the noes are Christopher Stalford and Jim Wells. Before the Assembly divides, I want to remind you that as per Standing Order 112, the Assembly currently has proxy arrangements in place. Members who have authorised another member to vote on their behalf are not entitled to vote in person and should not enter the lobbies. Remind also members of the requirement for social distancing while the division takes place. Clear lobbies. The Assembly will divide ayes to my right and noes to my left. Secure the lobbies. Secure the doors. Okay, members, can we resume our seats, please? Okay, members, could clerk could please read the result?
70 members voted, 41 members voted aye, 29 members voted no. The motion is carried.
Okay, members, the motion is carried. On, fasten the doors, please. And the next item on the order paper is the adjournment. The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. The Assembly is adjourned. I want to thank all the members for their participation in the debate. Thank you all.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly